I'm JC at Motorcycle Superstore, and today I want to talk about some of the areas on your motorcycle, whether it's a street bike like this, cruiser, dirt bike, whatever, where you can make easy upgrades, and talk to you a little bit about how you might do that within a budget, whatever that might be. We're going to work on this Honda NC700X. You obviously might have a different bike in your garage. However, a lot of the parts that we're working with, even if you're not interested in them specifically, those types of genres and those sections on the bike are areas that a lot of people are looking to upgrade. This can be a very rewarding experience. You sweat a little bit, get some dirt and grease under your fingernails, it increases your bond with your motorcycle. However, you got to be able to put yourself in that situation and not be afraid to get your hands dirty. There's no reason why you have to take your bike to a mechanic for the easy types of upgrades we're going to talk about today. So, the things that we're focusing on now are going to be the handlebars and control areas. We have new bars and grips, something to make us a little more comfortable, adjust our seating position. Also the front screen as well to get better protection. Something else that a lot of people are looking for is additional storage. On a bike like this, it's a commuter style bike, we definitely would like to make this a little more functional for day-to-day use. Also for touring applications. We have some side luggage that we're going to install. Also, it'd be great if this thing didn't sound quite as puny as it does. An exhaust system is on the way. We're just going to do a basic slip-on. They're inexpensive and they're very easy to put on. It takes a minimal amount of tools. All the things that you'll see us do today require just basic tools that you probably already have. So let's dig into this NC700X and see where it goes. Tires are one of the areas that are easily and most commonly upgraded. There's several reasons why you might do this. First off, the stuff you got on your bike is roached out. If your tires need to be replaced, it's a safety object. Go ahead and do that. Also, if you want to increase the performance, there's so many different levels of tires that increase by performance, by features, and by price to work within your budget. Or for the third reason, and this is our style today, is to change the nature of your bike entirely. If you look at this 700X, it kind of looks like an adventure bike. It's got the beak on it, the exposed suspension, so we'd like to make it a little bit more aggressive, a little more dual sport oriented. Obviously, we're not going to go bashing around. We won't be putting crash bars on it or skid plates, even though we could. However, we just want it to look a little bit better, and realistically, this thing is a commuter. We're going to spend most of our time going down the highway, but the owner of this bike wants to be able to hit the occasional dirt road. So what we're going to do is put this set of Continental TKC 80s on there. The TWINDURO is a great tire. It's going to give you the gnarly look that you need. It's also going to give us a little bit more performance in the dirt. However, honestly, we're not dragging our knees on this thing on the street, so we're not really concerned about ultimate street performance. This is going to suit us very, very well. They're available in lots of different sizes. However, I want to make a note. I fibbed to you a little bit earlier about saying we're going to do all the work ourselves. This is one area, particularly with street bikes, that you probably want to take to a shop. If you would like to save some money, you can pull your wheels off. You have to find some way to support your bike, but pull your wheels off and take those and the tires down to a shop. It'll probably save you a little bit in terms of labor cost. However, let's get these things installed. We'll take a look at how they set up on the bike, and I'm sure that we'll get the performance gains we're looking for. Well, we got our wheels back, and tell me if that thing doesn't look 1,000 times better already. I don't even think I have to do anything more to it, but we will. So next up, we're going to talk about our exhaust systems. The stock exhaust system is pretty plain and boring. Honestly, you can't even hear it at times in traffic. So what we're going to do is install this Yoshimura system. It's an R77. And the thing about this is that it's got the full carbon fiber canister system with stainless steel on the front end, but this is part of their street lineup. So what that means is it meets CARB and EPA emissions. It's also going to be an improvement in performance, weight, and sound. So let's see what this thing looks like as we put it on. Making this exhaust swap is about as simple as it gets. 2 bolts, that's all you have to worry about. It only takes 3 tools. Now, I mentioned before about getting your hands dirty. If you don't want to do that, you might be a pansy, but you can also just wear gloves as well. And with something like this, that might not be a bad idea. Exhaust systems tend to be warm if you just pull it in your garage or whatever. Make sure the thing is cooled down before you start working on it. I've got my 12 millimeters and an 11 millimeter to get the new pipe put on. So this is all it takes. We're going to start with this bolt up top, and we're going to get this thing loosened up. Once that's out, the only thing left is this pinch bolt up here that connects the mid pipe to the tailpipe. Fortunately, it uses the same 12 millimeters, very easy to do. Once that's loose, we can pull the whole thing off. But before we do that, pay attention to where this bracket is located. You'll notice it's on the back side of this mount, not the front side. We're going to match that up when we go ahead and install the Yosh system. There she is. In order to slip this on, we have to get the clamps in place. You can notice I've slipped this one over the main canister. I want to make a note about this. It's got this rubber guard on the inside to protect the carbon fiber from this piece of metal. Be careful with that, because once it gets off track and falls off, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get back on there. But get this roughly into the position you need. Also, we're going to slip this one over the front end. Make sure that the bolt is, or the nut rather on it, is going to be facing out. That way we can actually access it. So as we slip this thing over the top, this is one of the main differences. This uses an 11 millimeter, a little bit different than the 12 we were using. However, we're going to reuse the bolt on the upper mount. So make sure you hung on to this and with the nut for the back side. One thing to note with the R77 is that it uses this trapezoid shape, so the bracket fits it very specifically. The bracket needs to be rotated into the proper position on the back side of this mounting point. So when you're doing this, if you want it to look like a factory job, these springs should be in line with each other. The muffler and the tailpipe will rotate independently, so before you start tightening these down, rotate them as one single unit. That way, these things will be lined up, you can start tightening down your bolts. Also, one more thing to remember is before you tighten this front pinch bolt, my recommendation is to push it down a little bit. That way you don't have to worry about the back end of this thing sticking out and potentially catching on your foot or causing you problems down the road. Now all we have to do, tighten them down, throw this last bolt in, and basically we're done. Now that it's tightened down, the first thing we want to do is fire it up and see what it sounds like. However, before we do, we need to clean it up. Make sure to wipe down the stainless component and the carbon fiber as well with some rubbing alcohol. That will remove the oils that are left over from you handling it. And if you don't, there is a possibility that will leave staining. It's really a bigger idea, or a bigger problem rather, with titanium pipes. However, it is a concern. So make sure you wipe this thing down before you rip it up. Also, keep in mind, there is no heat shield on this aftermarket pipe compared to the stock unit. So when you're riding it, be aware of that so you don't burn off your heels. Let's button up the ass end of this thing with a set of GV luggage. These are the side cases we've elected to use. They're made by GV, it's an Italian company, high-end stuff, and this is the OUTBACK series. It's their newest and essentially the best for adventure touring purposes. There are several products in their lineup that really go more for street bikes, but this one is designed for extremely hardcore adventure touring use. Definitely more hardcore than what we're going to do with this bike. However, we know that they'll stand up to anything that we can put this thing through. So the real key here is the aluminum construction. It's been reinforced for the extra abuse it's going to take. We also really like the mono key design. That means there's one key which unlatches the top mechanism. It is a top open design. It's the same exact key that's going to allow you to remove the piece on the back, or actually remove the entire bag from the mounting hardware, which we'll show you in a second. So it's really easy to live with. Once you invest in these things, this makes it very nice. You carry one key with you. It's very simplistic. Now, the key here is the mounting hardware. The boxes are going to run you about $1,000. They're not cheap, but the mounting hardware, that's sold separately. So this is going to be specific, obviously, to your motorcycle. And when you order the mounting hardware, it will come with the specific kit to mount this to your bike. So for this NC700X, we have a kit that has a special set of brackets designed specifically for this. Now, the handful of hardware that comes with it, obviously the nuts and bolts are all designed to work in conjunction as well, but essentially this is what it looks like. It attaches the passenger foot pegs, the passenger hand grabs, and there will be a bar that connects the two pieces together. Once this thing is in place, installing the cases is very simple. You simply snap them on. So let's go ahead and get this thing bolted up. This is where the mechanical stuff comes into play, but really it's not too much work. The nice thing about it is it only takes really two tools. It takes a number 6 hex head, or an Allen key rather, and it also takes a pair of scissors because we need to put some sticky sided tape on some of the brackets. Let's get into it. First thing we need to do is get access to the passenger handhold bolts. There's 2 on each side. It's pretty easy to do. As we pop this seat, one of the things you'll note on this 700X is that it has this little lever that holds it in place. Now, once we remove this, it wants to fall down. So what we're actually going to do is pull this side off, prop it in place, and use it as a lever to keep this thing held up, and then we'll pull the other side off. Another thing worth noting, the hardware kit for this machine, it gives us 4 new bolts for this position, but it does not give us the washers. It requires that we reuse the washers for these positions. It gives us some extra washers to use elsewhere. So make sure you read the directions and pay attention to what it's requiring you to keep a hold of so you don't throw those things away. Now, Once those are removed, it's time to install the brackets. And if you pay attention to the instructions, we need to make sure that these bracket legs are pointing towards the rear of the bike. They're not really labeled, so you have to do a little bit of figuring out which way it's supposed to go. Fortunately, in this case, it's actually very simple. These are in the proper position. However, we need to put some sticky-sided tape on one of these. The front component is going to rest on some bodywork panels here. So nice enough, from GV, they've given us this sticky-sided tape. It's just basically a foam piece. It's gonna help protect that, insulate it. You won't get rattling. It also won't mar up the finish on your plastic piece. So this is the component that goes up front. The directions actually have a little spacer on there that shows you exactly how far to cut. I've already made a mark here, so it's very easy to do. We'll snip this thing in half and lay it in place. Now that the tape's on, we're going to install this, but the bracket has to go between the passenger handhold and the bodywork here. So we're gonna hold this in place, reposition this, and then drop the bolt all the way through both pieces. Now that our bracket kit is loosely in place, we're going to move on to the actual side racks. These are going to use a 13mm socket to get in place. The hardware is a simple 2 bolts up top and 2 bolts down low. One of the things to note on this is the bracket itself, or the side pannier here, actually has the welded nut on the back side, which means these brackets will sit across the front side of it. This is where having them loose really comes in handy. As you can see, I need to move this thing around a little bit to get these holes to line up on the passenger footbeds. Now, once these are in place, everything is located, and I must say, GV actually did a pretty good job of getting the tolerances close. It's very easy to line up. Now we can actually cinch these things down. We'll go through them, tighten them up. Same thing goes for the back side as well. Now I haven't attached the other side, and I haven't attached the retainer bar that goes across the back as well, but since we've got one in place, let's see if this box actually lines up. That looks awesome. Now that the bags fit properly and we're sure of it, we have one more thing to do. We'll yank these off and install that last piece of bracket bar across the back end to give these bags a little bit more support in a lateral manner. After that, make sure everything's tight with one more check over, and now we can move to the front of the bike and start working on the controls up there. On the front of the bike, we have several components we're dealing with, including RENTHAL handlebars and grips, we have ACERBIS HANDGUARDS, and we have a new windscreen. But the windscreen is bigger and taller. I don't really want that cluttering up my workspace, so we'll save that for last. We're gonna start things with the handlebars. A few things to remember here. First off, we're going to be installing the handguards which mount from the end of the handlebars, which means we won't be able to reuse these anti-vibration inserts, so we don't have to worry about pulling those off. However, the rest of the componentry does have to come off, so the first thing that we want to do is remove those, and we're doing that before we unclamp it from the center clamp. That makes it a lot easier, it holds the bar in place, and we can work on it. Here's a little tip for you. This goes for the handlebars, really any other project as well. It's handy to sometimes take a photo of these things with your cell phone. If you wind up using them later, it's really great. If you don't, it's no big deal. But having that visual reference allows you to tell exactly where your cables were routed, how things were mounted up. Sometimes it's just nice to have that little piece of memory in your back pocket. So before we do this, we'll take a few photos and then we'll start getting these things unbolted. Standard zip ties are a one-time thing. Once you cinch them down, you got to cut them off. However, on the handlebar side of things, the little ties that come from the OEMs are going to be actually removable and replaceable. So there's a little pull tab here. You can pop this off and actually get these things unclipped, which means don't snip them off in the first place, and also make sure you hang on to them so you can reuse them. Obviously, if you don't, if you lose it, whatever, you can always use a standard zip tie, but those things are really cool. It makes manipulating these things a lot easier as you're doing regular maintenance. Switching to our aluminum handlebar is going to save a little weight, but the real advantage is in the ergonomics. That's why people are swapping out their bars. Really, there's three measurements that you're concerned with: the overall width, the rise, and the sweep. This is going to change the way the bike feels. However, before we get everything bolted on, since we're changing things up, I'm going to put this handlebar in place and clamp it down, and I'm going to move it through the entire range of motion. I want to make sure that it's not going to hit anywhere on the fairing. When you're changing things up, you want to do that first before you do all the extra work. So once we do that, if everything lines up properly, then we'll start reinstalling all the rest of the components. Once we put the new bars in place, we discovered a little bit of a snag here. The mounting hardware for the throttle, the right side switchgear, and the left side switchgear all have locating pins put into them. So basically we have two different options. We can either grind these pins off, or we can drill a hole in the new bars so that they'll match up like they did on the stock handlebar. Something to pay attention to. There are certain motorcycles out there where this pin acts as the ground for your switchgear. In that case, you would not want to grind it off. These are painted, they're not going to be a ground. However, what we're going to do here is drill the handlebar anyway, just to keep it clean, keep it like it was with the stock unit. And in order to do that, we have to take a few measurements. But fortunately, it's not too difficult. All we're going to do here is slide the throttle housing, or the entire throttle tube, into position. And once we get this thing in place, we'll take a small pencil, mark where the pin's going to go, and then I can drill that and locate this and clamp it in place. After that, the switchgear can go on because it's mated to this, and once the switchgear is in place, we'll mark that one, do the same thing there. On the left side, it's a little bit different. We don't necessarily have a grip in place, so the grip that we know we're going to install, I'll slide this one on, line it up the way it will be once we're all finished so the end is flush. At that point, we can put the switchgear here on the left side, mark it, do the same procedure over here. Now, it's a little bit tricky. It adds an extra step we weren't necessarily accounting for. However, it still doesn't take a whole lot of specialty tools just to drill. What you'll want to do is take your existing bars, if you are going to drill and not grind it down, and match that up. Find a drill bit that matches that hole. In this case, it's a 5/16. We happen to have one. So we'll get this thing drilled up and see if we can't get these installed as they were on the stock unit. Well, that added a couple extra minutes to our job here, but a couple of things I noted along the way. You want to make sure you're doing this with your handlebars in their finished position. So get on the bike, get this thing in the position you know you're going to want, then cinch down that clamp in the center. After that point, you're going to need to make sure all your controls are right where they're needing to be. Otherwise, if you start drilling these holes, you're going to wind up with these things out of order. They'll be either too high, too low. So take special care. Also, I was able to mark one of these with the pencil. I was not on the other two. So what I did was I found some sort of a substance. In this case, it was a little RTV gasket maker. This would work, a dab of grease, a paint pen, whatever it is. Mark the end of that locating pin inside the housings, hold it in place right where it needs to be, and then slide that thing on. It'll leave a little bit of that grease or whatever it is on the bar itself. Then you can take it apart, you have that mark, and you can drill them out. Now that we have these things done, bolted up and ready to go, we are moving on to the grips. I have an entire video on how to install grips. You can see the link for that here. However, this is essentially the same concept. So we'll glue these things in place, get them fixed down, and then we'll move on to the handguards. Our bars and grips are done. I wanted to point out one thing though, since we ran into a little surprise, this little flange on the end of the throttle tube. We trimmed it off, we got a grip on there, it's no big deal. Now we can move on to the handguards, and that's going to be one, better for protection, but also better for our vision. Before we delve into the handguards too much, there's a few things to think about. Notably, how are you going to route the wire systems that need to be connected into the switch? Where is that switch going to be mounted on your handlebars? Now, the first thing that ACERBIS wants you to do is to cut the wires to length before you install the guards, which in my mind is a pretty bad set of directions. You need to get these things put on first. That way you can figure out where exactly your wires are going to go. And in this case, I would like it to look pretty clean. We're going to try to route the wires along existing cables so that they look factory. We also have picked up an extra bit of wire. We've matched it up. It's going to be black so that the colors don't stand out. And actually, we're going to mount the switch over here on the left-hand side, which is right next to the normal high-low beam. So you can handle your standard lights and your auxiliary lights with the same motion. Now, one of the things to note on the Vision is that it does not come with the extra wire. That's something you have to have laying around or get from a hardware store. However, that piece or the pieces that you'll be using for that are going to route to your battery. And on this bike, the battery is located here underneath this cowling up front. Most of them will be located further back, so you're going to need to consider how much wire you need, also the route that you're going to take for those pieces of wire as well. Now that we have that sort of laid out, we'll go ahead and get these things finalized and then start connecting the wires. It's time for the moment of truth when we actually cut the wires coming out of the handguards. Now here's the deal. Basically what we have is a switch mechanism here that we've located on the left-hand side of the bar, but really inside of here, inside this junction box, there's not a lot of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the power wires, which are the red wires from both handguards. Those will come into it, as well as the main power wire, which comes from the battery up into the box as well. So that's 3 wires going in, and that's going to be a tight fit. There's no way I could really manage the negative wires in there as well. So I'm going to have to split those off, run them down the handlebars away, and create another junction. What that means is, in terms of this left side bar, I cannot cut it short. I'm going to give myself a little extra space so that this can actually run down, and I will trim my power wire a little bit shorter here and make that fit properly. It takes a little bit of planning before you start snipping things, so make sure you give yourself enough time and enough thought, double check your work before you go ahead and cut these things off. So we finally have the handguards on. As you can see, they do work. The switch is where we want it to be. There's a couple things about this that make it a little more technical than the rest of the install that we've done today. The wiring is really a little bit more difficult. You have to make sure that they're going to the right spot. You're hooking them into the battery. But the things you really need to pay attention to is the proper positioning of the handguards. You don't want to cut anything too short, like we mentioned earlier. Get these things sort of loose fit. As you can see, they're still loose. Once you get them there, then you can route your cables, really pay attention to where they're at, and then tie them in very well to the battery system itself. Once that's all done, it's just a matter of running the zip ties, cleaning things up. I'll cinch these things down and we're off and running. One final bit of adjustment here as well. These actually move left to right. So the nice thing about that is you can control just where you're getting your spread of light. However, we're gonna have to get this thing out on the road at night type conditions to really find out what works best. But once that's the case, we'll tighten them down and these things will be locked in solid. All that's left now is the GV windscreen, so let's get to it. Our final step is to install the GV windscreen. This is their spoiler windscreen. They're gonna fit all number of different bikes. So the one for your machine might look a little different, but check this thing out. Much wider, much taller. The protection that we will be getting from this is significant. So now in the winter seasons or in the colder months, we have hand protection here from the elements, greater protection here. It's really gonna make this thing a lot nicer to ride year round. 4 little bolts, looks like a number 5 or 6 Allen here, and we'll get this thing swapped out. Installation on this windscreen doesn't get any easier. The 4 bolts are in and out, straightforward. However, remember that these are a rubber mounted system. It's anti-vibration, that's the whole purpose, but the threaded inserts are fairly small. Don't over tighten them or you can strip them out. Also, the bolts probably have, like in this case, a plastic washer, maybe a rubber washer to help with that anti-vibration. Don't lose those, keep those in place so it's a nice solid fix. Another thing to note, it's an aftermarket part. So when you start mixing and matching aftermarket parts, you might have clearance issues. In this case, we actually have to trim a little bit because these handguards are gonna run into it. Not a huge deal, but don't be surprised if that's the case once you start mixing and matching different product brands. That wraps it up for our project bike, and hopefully you can see that doing some of the modifications yourself, doing aftermarket add-ons, is really, one, a rewarding experience for you as a mechanic and a rider, but also it provides a motorcycle that meets your specific needs much better. Let me know what you think about our little project build. Leave me some comments on this video, and be sure to check out our parts and accessories pages so you can get busy in your own garage.